On my far right, not necessarily politically, is Tom Watkins, who was State Superintendent of Public Instruction in the first part of this decade, 2001 to 2005. And so he knows how things work, but he can tell you the truth about it since he's not there anymore. Next to him is John Bebo, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Michigan, which is, they call it a think and do tank. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan group aimed at trying to bring common sense discussion and involve people in the future of Michigan. And he's the former journalist of high reputation. And next to me is Michelle Herbon, who's with she's a consultant, senior consultant, we're all senior here, specializing in education policy for public sector consultants. I have it on reliable authority. She was unable to get into Washtenaw Community College, so she got a master's from Harvard University in education policy. So we're lucky to have such a star-studded panel. Doug Ross, who is the founder of New Urban Learning Systems, who now wears multiple hats and runs charter schools in Detroit, was also supposed to be here, but a family illness prevented him. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a panel discussion where I'll ask them questions and hold their feet to the fire for about 40 minutes. And then you're going to vote on various questions, and then you'll have a chance to turn the tables on us and ask questions. So I'm going to start by asking our three panelists to answer a very simple question. What's wrong with public education in Michigan, and why? Starting with Tom.
Start with an easy one, right? What's wrong with public education today? It's what's been wrong with it for quite some time. It's too much focus on power, control, politics, and adults, and not enough focus on teaching, learning, and children. We need to be asking ourselves, not the political, what's right from an ideological standpoint, but what's right for children. The only adjective, in my estimation, that matters before the word school should be quality. It doesn't matter if you have a lousy chartered school, a lousy traditional school, a lousy e-learning opportunity. We need to be able to compete with the kids of the world. And too much focus oftentimes is on the system, power, control, politics, and adults.
I should have mentioned that we're going to focus tonight on what's called K-12 education, elementary and high school education, rather than higher education. What I'm going to do is go next to Michelle and then John, because you have a sort of different status, I'm going to repurpose the question a little bit for you. So, Michelle Herbon, same question. What, from where you sit, is wrong with public education in Michigan?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that we've had a system that has looked more or less the same for every single one of us in here, and it looks the same for the 4-year-olds that we run into as well. Our communities and our economy has different needs than it did 20 years ago. It has different needs than it did 10 years ago. And our school system needs to be able to respond better to what we as communities and we as an economy need from it. And so I think being more open to different approaches, being more open and putting everything out on the table and saying the system that we have isn't working well for every kid. What can we do differently? And like Tom said, not being concerned about politics and not being concerned about so-called adult issues, and instead having real conversations about how we can impact learning for kids all across the state.
John, if you want to respond to the question itself, you may, but I thought you might be more comfortable talking about what the Center for Michigan is doing in terms of public education.
Thank you, Jack. Tom, can you hold my beer?
I have a lot of training doing that as former state superintendent. Thank you.
I didn't say drink my beer. I said hold my beer. And I like keep your hand above the beer so it doesn't get warm.
He's not executive director for nothing.
And I'm the only one up here drinking beer, so I have the least credibility of the panelists. The most? All right, good. Where's your beer, Jack? I'll touch on a couple of things. One of the things that's wrong with public education is there isn't enough of this. There are hearing rooms in Lansing in the state capitol this year where some awfully big education decisions have been discussed, and you're not there. You're busy. You're trying to raise families and work and everything else. Part of what the center is trying to do is get more people involved in the discussion about education because you're not in the Capitol where these big decisions are getting made. An awful lot of the discussion in the Capitol is about the adult issues in education. I'm sure we could talk a lot about pay and whether great educators should be paid $1 million a year, benefits and all those kinds of adult issues. There isn't a lot of discussion about student learning. I don't know, for example, what right to teach has to do with reading proficiency or math proficiency. One of the concerns we've had, we have a publication called Bridge Magazine. We've been doing a lot of educational research with public sector consultants. And our concern is growing about proficiency. I know we could have a lot of debate about test scores as well. But based on the systems for testing that we have, Michigan's not in great shape nationally in terms of how our student proficiency is scoring. And the U.S. is lagging a lot of other nations. And we're in a global economy. That's a big concern. It's why the center will be hitting the road over the next year, holding meetings like this a couple of hundred times to get students and parents and business leaders, the customers of education, as well as those frontline educators, talking about various options to improve student learning. There are a lot of ideas out there, from changing the school calendar to reducing class size, especially at the early elementary level. The governor's big on online learning. I think I've already heard some people talking about that here tonight. There are a number of other approaches that we can discuss. We want to tap the public and learn what you want done. That's why we're going to be in your communities. There's some materials on your table tonight talking about how you can engage in that conversation if you'd like.
In the world in which I grew up, and of course I'm old, education, public education in this state was primarily funded by local communities appropriating millages. Almost 18 years ago, we decided that didn't work anymore in the state. And in March of 1994, we gave voters a choice between funding education primarily by income tax or by what they chose to do. 69% of them chose to do, which we call Proposal A, which is most of funding is based on a state per pupil grant. This was supposed to fix the problems of education, especially poorer districts. 18 years on, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with Proposal A. I want to start with Michelle. Could you talk about Proposal A? Was this a gigantic failure or not? And what ought we to do about it now?
So I think that it's funny that he started with me because I actually told Tom up here as we were getting ready that everything I know about school finance in Michigan I learned from him. So I don't know if it's allowed on a panel, but I'm going to ask Tom if maybe he could give us some of the background and kind of kickstart this conversation as someone who understands this topic in a lot more depth.
You can do that, but I'm going to come back to you.
That's fine. You can come back, but let's get some of the facts on the table first so that before we start having a deeper conversation.
Well, if you go back to 1993-94, Proposal A did a lot of good things. But like a 1993 car, it's now 2011. It needs a tune-up, perhaps a new engine put in it. As state superintendent, we put together with the State Board of Education a proposal called From Proposal A to Proposal A Plus, which laid out some ways in which we can change it. The problem with educational funding today is that we have a lot of politicians that will tell you that education is the top priority. Let me see a show of hands of if you think education should be the top priority of the state of Michigan.
Should be or is.
I think everybody's hand is up. Now what we'll have is we'll have Democrats, Republicans, governor, and legislature that'll come and say that they love schools. And they love schools so much that they funded schools an extra $100 per student. Can I hear the applause, please? $100 a student. That's really great. And do you understand that we need about $250 to $300 a year, new money, in order to cover health care and pension costs for the people that work, about 100,000+ folks who work in public education a year. So that when we have a good year and put $100 in schools, what you have is superintendents, school boards, business officers that are having to cut $200 per student out of the school funding of education. So what we've had is a big, what is the academic word for that? Lie that's been perpetuated on the people of the state of Michigan, where people are saying that we're funding education, we're not. And so we need to have an honest discussion about what do we expect, how do we treat the people that work in the educational system fairly, decently, and humanely, and pay them, as what John said, a decent and a high-quality wage and salary and benefits, but also making sure that we're providing educational opportunities for our kids that are going to enable them to compete on the world stage. Some of you may know I've been traveling to China for over a quarter of a century. Lifelong interest sparked by a great fourth grade teacher. And I just got back not too long ago, and I asked them in China, you know, you guys are slowing down, right? Because you've heard the problems we're having here in America and in Michigan. I think they're still laughing today. They're moving forward. Other people are moving forward while we're having these adult and ideological conversations, and people, our politicians, are lying to us about their support for public education.
All right, Michelle, now that he's set the foundation, how would you fix public school funding in this state?
Well, I think that's an incredibly difficult conversation.
Of course.
And I think one of the biggest challenges from my perspective is that it involves having conversations that people don't like to have. To say things like, it costs more money to educate high-risk children who have different needs, children who come from poverty, children who have needs beyond the school, perhaps. And I think that Michigan, along with a lot of other states in our country, needs to have a conversation about the fact that what is fair is not always equal. And just having a per pupil funding allocation that is equally distributed to every student across the state of Michigan, no matter where they live, no matter what circumstances and challenges their district faces, is not fair, and it's not yielding the results that we need. It's not helping kids learn to their highest of ability. I think of things like, for example, some schools in our state need to pay to have security, right? They need to have a security guard. They need to have metal detectors when you're walking into school. The state of Michigan's not sending extra dollars to that school to install those things that we need. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree that some schools need those things so that kids can come to school and feel safe. But those dollars are coming out of the classroom so that those things can be provided. And I think having a conversation about funding differently for different needs in our state is a productive one.
Okay, John, the Center for Michigan's been holding for years community conversations throughout the entire state. Do you see there being a disconnect from how people feel about education and the lawmakers in Lansing?